Alright, still playing Winter War. We're towards the end, not quite in the ice stage yet. The Russians have moved. They shifted a big unit into place to make 2-to-1 attack here. They've still got an attack going here. Here in the center, things are very, very weak. They're making a couple little attacks just in the hopes of trying to take some of the pressure off. There's nothing terribly valuable there, just chem. But they really don't want to let the Finns stream in and get control there and maybe turn this flank and turn this flank. Over here also, kind of pushing there. And up near Murmansk, trying to build sort of a defensive line that's a little stronger. Murmansk itself is held. They had kind of a strong line before, but if they can force the Allies to slip in, maybe they can kind of ambush them, they're thinking. I don't know. Maybe they would have been better off defending the river line. And the Finnish units across here see no reason to be afflicted with a 2-to-1 attack, so they've just pulled back everywhere. Ooh, I haven't done that one. We did have a destruction here near the Mannheim line, and this is still a 3-to-1. Let me do a quick roll. Ooh, that's going to be an exchange. I gotta lose a 6. But as you can see, the Finns have lost some of their good units, and now both lines have been weakened. That's putting the Finns in a much, much weaker position than they were before, with sort of their key areas being threatened now because of maybe the risk they took here. And here, well, this has been waiting to happen all game. It just finally did. So we're going to probably have to see some of the Finns sliding down to try to cover that. And we're seeing a weakness in their position developing. And the Finns continue with their harassing tactics everywhere, and they've tried to fill in these lines as best as they can. We can see there are some definite weak spots, and this is back in place. Again, possible trade-off there. All you can get is an exchange attacking that, but it's the best the Russians can do right now. They're back to the Mannheim line, though, and, well, that probably means the Russians will reposition to defend Leningrad again. There wasn't a good attack against that at 12-8 or whatever. Here, we're going to see an attack, not on Murmansk, but kind of on these edge points here to try to allow the Allied and Finnish troops to push around and actually capture Murmansk there. I think it was a definite mistake to give up that river line at this point. I don't see where this is going to do any good for the Russians. The net effect of all this, a little bit more damage to the Russians than to the Finns. Moving over here, we see kind of these incursions becoming a little bit more dangerous looking. Just in terms of turning this flank, the headquarters can't really defend anything. We got to throw another unit in place. There's not a lot to do there that is effective. Now we check to see if the Soviet event takes place, and this is the last turn on the second chart. A 4 is a J. J's increased Soviet replacements at 2-1-2 during the reinforcements for next turn. Well, I'll throw that into place here. I forgot about the reinforcement this last turn, but that's okay. I put it into play after the Russian turn. Alright. Well, it looks pretty clear to me at this point the Russians aren't going to win this war. In fact, they're not going to even gain any ground on the Finns here. This is really a Finnish advantage throughout the game. But we can play it out, see if the Finns gain anything, actually. Alright, let's see. You know, I think I've been screwing up. The Russians have to attack here. And I'll move this guy here 1-2 so that they can get an attack in on that at 1-1 to make the odds a little better for them. Otherwise, they're really only performing an attack here. They're just kind of pulling back and trying to hope an opportunity arises. Maybe the Finns will get too exuberant in their attacks. I don't know. We end up with another exchange down here. Another big Russian unit goes in exchange for one of the Finnish fortified location units. But, you know, there's a certain attritional value to wiping out those Finnish units. They're double the size, so it's not too terrible. I mean, they're double the size just because they're in the fortifications. But as those Finnish units start dropping, maybe it'll become easier to make those attacks. I don't know. Up here, things did not go well, and it looks like Murmansk is going to fall. Here, the Finns withdrew with one unit. I forgot to withdraw with another, and it got attacked. Onward to them. But the Finns got some replacement units or reinforcements reinforcement units, so they were able to kind of fill that gap in, and they're trying to curve the line here. The Murmansk area, well, they clearly have the advantage right there, but they're just trying to get the forces into position so that they can get a sufficient attack. They don't have to worry, though, about being next to things. And you can see here they're preparing for some attacks against some of the forward Russian units, just driving them further and further in. I forgot to sweep up the losses from the earlier part of the turn, the Russian side, but the Russians lost a number of lighter units here as the Finns and the Allies are pushing forward, mainly the Finns here, making these attacks deeper and deeper towards the White Sea. Well, once again, the kind of exciting part of the game, seeing whether or not there's an event. And there is not one this turn. This is actually an ice turn. I didn't really think about that. There's not much effect. It's just these few hexes here. The Russians haven't gained enough momentum to push through the Mannheim line, so that's not really an issue. Anyway, we'll push into the next turn. We only have a couple more turns. I think it's just about impossible for the Russians to win this one. Looking at the victory conditions, the Finns look like they're going to have positive victory points. So basically, the Russians need to gain at least 30 points to negate a Finnish decisive victory. In this case, I think it's the Finns and the Allies who are going to have the victory points. That's actually going to be a negative total because of Murmansk. I'm just not seeing the Russians really being able to capture anything in Finland the way this has gone. The Russians do get some big units, though, and we can see, and I think this is legal, they've got a 1282 coming into the Murmansk area. I couldn't find a good, valuable use for it down here in the fort lines. It wasn't enough to give the modifier. I may regret that later. That's my biggest remaining unit. But right now I think Murmansk is the most important thing. And it's kind of, disturbing to be at a minus victory point total. So if I can at least call this a stalemate, well, I may not get anything from Finland, but at least I won't be losing this chunk of territory, for example. All right, we'll see how these attacks go. Well, another quick trade-off down here, and the Finns are going to have to keep pumping more and more in. They're running out of their big units. They don't have anything more to hold that. Of course, the Russians are getting more decent-sized units coming in, so the loss that they took isn't as severe. We only have this unit for the Finns. That's the best they're going to be able to put in the line, basically. I forgot completely about the attacks in the Murmansk salient, and I just took them out, and the Allies did indeed lose that. They don't get a defensive bonus for holding a Soviet city. So it looks like there's actually maybe a chance of taking Betsamo anyhow. Well, no, that's a lie. I'm on the last, second to last turn. Next turn, I could get to Murmansk, and that's the best I can do. Anyway, for the Finns, set up for a couple of key attacks, basically turning the line here. We added another unit into the fortifications. I think we're not going to see much change here. The only real question is the Murmansk one. And the Finns managed little, if anything. They killed one unit over here. They pulled back from the Murmansk line. They can't hold it. And it's not worth really trying, given the situation. There's just too much power up there. But the Russians aren't going to gain anything anyway. We're going to be moving on, but I got to make a quick check on that event. We got nothing this turn. Alright, so this is the last turn of the game. Got Russians one more chance to try to break in and do something. Well, here we are on the Russians' last turn, and there's nothing they can do to prevent an overwhelming or decisive Finnish victory, but they did grab Murmansk, taking the points away for that. And they're doing a few other things, continuing the attack here, just kind of as a denouement, as it were, to, put an end to the story at a time. In a particular slice. Certainly, it wouldn't have been unreasonable to have conceded, say, even just a couple turns ago, saying, I cannot possibly do well enough to beat, to get you even out of a decisive victory. And that would be perfectly reasonable, I think, among any group to say something like that. But, well, I think it's interesting to play out games just for the sake of playing them, so I tend to do this. You saw me kind of bail out of a couple of the SPQR scenarios because the battle, everything interesting in the battle had kind of happened already. Here, has everything interesting happened? I don't know. There's kind of a feeling that maybe peace negotiations or whatever might be reflected by some, or affected by some of the battles and the fighting that's going on in a different way that a tactical situation like that wouldn't really allow. However you want to take it. And, well, the big event, another exchange here. The Russians still don't get any ground, though, because there's no advance rules in this game after combat. There are advances before combat, essentially. Elsewhere, well, we see total some losses for the Finns, but overall, I don't think the Russians did terribly well this turn in terms of the trade-offs that they got. Anyway, we get to go to the Finns now. And at this point, I think they can concede that they're not going to gain anything of interest. There was the possibility that maybe something would open up an opportunity, but there's nothing they can really reach the way the Russians are set up. So I would say this is indeed the end. I don't see a point in playing out what's probably not even going to be a die roll. I mean, you might make an attack like this at 2-1 or something, but there's no attack on Murmansk available. There's nothing to gain coming down this way. There's just no advantages for the Finns. So it is over at this point, and just a matter of no points. Nothing's going to really switch hands. So the event, which one did we get here? Scenario E, German threat. That's actually the worst event that you can have as the Russians. And I don't know if there's a chance that the Russians can really win with that event in play, because it doesn't significantly change their victory point situation. The only thing it really does is it opens that Petsamo space up. Now, I don't know if A does the same. Oh, each Allied unit eliminated is worth 5 Soviet victory points. So the Soviets got some points because they killed at least a couple of those Allied units. There were 3 to begin with. Now there's only 1. So they got 10 points. I don't see any other points anywhere, but you needed 30 to break the Finnish decisive victory, and that just didn't happen. But this is a really, really tough scenario pick for the Russians to have a chance on. You need not play with the scenarios and the optional special events and all that. I think it is what adds something to this game and what actually makes it kind of special to me. So I wouldn't be interested in playing without it. It's a short game with a high luck factor because of that. And I'll load this one up and I'll come back with, well, more of a straight up review that I'm giving in the wrap here.